voting is a fundamental issue we have in this country. It is something that we take very seriously. Now imagine being too poor to vote. That's the case for more than 200,000 felons in Alabama, half of them black, because of a requirement that they pay back what can add up to thousands and thousands of dollars in court fines and other fees before they can regain their right to vote. Now, you might remember, we talked about Alabama restoring the rights of formerly incarcerated, but now there's a wrinkle. Now, even though there's a state law aimed at clearing the way of those convicted of certain kinds of felonies to eventually regain the right to vote, the financial requirement makes it impossible. It's true even for the many felons whose crimes will not disenfranchise them under the law. Now, the ACLU has called such monetary barriers an unconstitutional poll tax. Out of the more than 286,000 disenfranchised felons in Alabama, nearly 144,000 are African American. That means disenfranchised felons make up more than 15% of the state's black voting age population, according to the Sentencing Project. Joining us right now via phone from Montgomery, Alabama, is Randall Marshall, Executive Director of the ACLU of Alabama. Our panel, A. Scott Bolden, attorney in D.C., who heads, of course, the National Bar Association's Political Action Committee, Julian Malveaux, economist and president emerita at Bennett College, and Ralph Chittum's Republican strategist and also head of Black Elephants Consulting. So, Randall, it's very interesting. Here we have.
Good morning, and thanks for having me on to talk about this important issue in Alabama.
We had folks who were excited about Alabama coming to the 21st century when it came to giving folks the right to vote who formerly were incarcerated. Now, all of a sudden, we're hearing about this thousands and thousands of dollars. So give us an example of how much money we're talking about that somebody would have to pay back before they can vote.
Well, as you say, it can amount to thousands and thousands, because what happens is someone gets convicted of a crime and there may be jail time, but there are also fines and penalties, and when one can't pay that back all at once, they end up paying over time, and the bills just never get paid off. There was a recent article in The Guardian that showed a woman from Dothan, Alabama, who literally has thousands of dollars in fines that she simply cannot pay.
And when you look at, again, what the officials there are doing, how they even enforcing this, and how is it constitutional?
Well, let me back up just a little bit, because this problem of disfranchisement really first came to light during the 2000 election, and particularly in Florida, given the closeness of the election that resulted in the Supreme Court decision in Bush v. Gore. And it's been since that time that states, particularly in the South, that bear the legacy of the Civil War and the attempts after the Civil War to come up with new creative ways to disfranchise and prevent black Americans in particular from being able to vote. And so in Alabama, it's embedded in the Constitution that if you're convicted of a crime of moral turpitude, you lose your right to vote unless those rights are restored. For decades now, what was a crime of moral turpitude was up to each of the individual 67 registrars in the state. And again, this woman in The Guardian is a great example, because she was convicted of fraudulent use of a credit card in 2008, and it was determined that that was a crime of moral turpitude. That particular crime is no longer one of moral turpitude as set out in state law, and so that particular crime would have never caused her to lose her right to vote.
Where are we now in terms of going with this? Are you suing the state of Alabama, and what happens next?
Well, there are two things going on. Number one, and this did not come as much surprise, after the governor signed the bill that specifically outlined what crimes are crimes of moral turpitude, the Secretary of State's office did not make this a priority to try in any way to contact people who may have been improperly excluded from the rolls years ago, nor has it taken steps to get the word out that while you may have once been determined to be ineligible to vote, that may no longer be true. And so the ACLU, along with Legal Services Alabama, came together to hold a series of workshops around the state, and these are still ongoing, to try and get the word out and to work with people on an individual basis to determine what steps, if any, they need to have their rights restored. As to litigation, the courts are not friendly to these claims. The last attempt was in Florida that ultimately went to the 11th Circuit and was narrowly the Florida disfranchisement was narrowly upheld by the 11th Circuit, and so I think our future lies in political action and legislative action as opposed to the courts.
All right, Randall, we surely appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
I want to go to our panel here, Scott. This is, again, what we keep talking about here, where you have these efforts, largely led by Republicans in many of these states, especially southern states, to, again, deny people their rights. And so now, all of a sudden, by saying, oh, we'll give you the right to vote, but you got to pay all of this money back.
Yeah, you know, Roland, a lot of these laws, like carnal knowledge. You know, state of Virginia has carnal knowledge laws still on the books. Alabama has moral turpitude. I don't even know what moral turpitude is.
Yeah, you do.
No, I don't. The reality is this. This could easily be fixed if there was a legislative will. Why not give judges the right to waive these fines based on individuals being indigent? Why not let them work it off through community service as an alternative? Or why not waive the penalties and the interest on these fines and let these individuals do a payment plan, whether it's $5 a month, $10 a month, whatever they can afford? There's a way to get around this without going through the courts. It may be legislative, but the reality is you have to have the legislative will and really the commitment to empowering voters or to empowering people to vote, and it doesn't seem like it's there in Atlanta.
You know, Roland.
Ralph, again, I keep challenging Republicans on this. Why do they continue to make it harder for people to vote? These are people who actually serve their time.
Right.
Why throw more barriers up?
It makes no sense. And I'm not the only Republican who feels this way.
You sure are agreeing with Democrats a lot today.
Well, when you guys make sense, I'll agree with you.
We always make sense.
But when you're getting back to this issue about this money, what you've really done is you've figuratively taken these individuals and you've placed them figuratively in a debtor's prison. And that,
literally.
And that's not supposed to occur here. Mm-hmm. You know, if you have done your time, if you have done your sentence, community service, halfway house, or whatever it is, and you're completely off paper, your voting rights should be restored to you. And this sort of debtor's prison system that has been artificially created is wrong.
And
period.
You know, if we juxtapose this with the amazing win of Randall Woodland, the young man who won the mayoralty of Birmingham against all odds, if we juxtapose this taking away of voting rights with when we do what we're supposed to do as African American voters, the kind of power that we can yield as we're looking at a number of states, what it really does suggest is the fear, the absolute fear of people of color who are quickly becoming the majority of America, the fear of our stepping up and enjoying and exercising our full citizenship rights. You know, Scott is right. There should be a way to work these things off. But again, let's break this fine thing down. How many of these fines are compounded by late fees, compounded by interest rates, which means that essentially you never get out of this. Do we intend for people to be fully engaged citizens, or do you intend to put people at the periphery, which is what we're attempting to do? And this Birmingham victory was just utterly stunning, utterly stunning. We got to celebrate that even as we look at those rednecks in Alabama and say, fix it, y'all.
And this is something that we can work collaboratively on.
Right. Affordability ought to be a factor.
Coming up next up.
Weekdays on TV One.
I will never lie to you.
Oh my God.
Roland Martin.
He doesn't want to talk to us. He wants to ignore us.
Uncensored.
Hell no.
That ain't gonna cut it, boo.
Unapologetic.
No, that is fundamentally false. You are wrong.
Unfiltered.
He wants an America where we all look alike. He ain't talking about black people.
Unrelenting.
You better go work out. because you got a fight on your hands.
NewsOne Now with Roland Martin. Weekdays at 7 a.m. on TV1.